I'm just going to repeat the agenda briefly. So I'm going to start with some prepared remarks, a background, an overview on sales tax and the brief history of sales tax in Onondaga County, the current sales tax agreement, the proposed agreement, some thoughts about alternatives and questions. First, I want to thank you for giving us the opportunity to come here and talk with you guys about this today. Our goal is to try to make sure that you have all the information that you need as you make an informed decision this coming week about the sales tax agreement. I want to start with a couple of things just about the administration's priorities here. As you guys know from day one, achieving fiscal sustainability for the city of Syracuse has been one of our most important duties. And I just want to reinforce that this is an essential step in rebuilding the strength of the city. It's a sustainable and predictable revenue stream, an important move forward for achieving fiscal sustainability overall. The proposed deal is a good deal for the city. It's actually providing a larger share of sales tax than the current agreement does, because this deal locks in the best years of the prior agreement for all 10 years. So it's actually going to be tens of millions more in revenue for the city than the current agreement provides. And that's securing that crucial revenue for a decade. Getting the agreement done also gives us the ability to free up the time that we could have otherwise be spending sort of haggling over an agreement to focus on the remaining goals that you guys know that we have as an administration: improving our neighborhoods, delivering quality services, and providing opportunity for all of our residents. And this will also provide us with the resources we need to be able to do that. And then for us, for this process, and for everything that we do, what we tried to keep in mind here is that we needed to do what was best for the city and the citizens, and that's the guiding principle of what we do. And we truly believe that this deal is the best deal for the city and for the citizens. With that out of the way, I'm going to start by providing a little bit of an overview of sales tax in New York State, as well as some historical context about the agreements in Onondaga County historically.
Just one question. As I read the contract, we have to approve it by January 30th, or else the county's approval is rescinded. Is that the proper reading?
Correct, and that's historically they have used that method. They want it done a certain date. Yep.
Thank you. Sorry to.
No problem. I'll provide some context about the existing agreement that we are operating under now, and then we'll talk a little bit more. I do know, Councilor, that you provided some questions in advance. Answers to those questions are in the packet that is in front of you, but we can also take questions at the end of this conversation.
The packet is the stapled section.
We don't have the direct responses?
We don't have the direct responses.
No, I have talking points on them, so we can go through them.
Not in my packet.
No,
okay.
But in mine, so. Sales tax overview and background. So just from a terminology standpoint, just defining what we're talking about, sales tax is the tax imposed on retail items of tangible personal property and services, and then use taxes also apply here, and that is a tax that applies if you buy a retail item outside of the state but use it within New York State. So that's the sort of body of goods we're talking about. In New York State, the sales tax at the state level is 4%. Onondaga County has a total tax rate of sales tax rate of 4% with a 3% base rate and an additional 1% rate. You're going to hear us refer to both the 3% base rate and the additional 1% rate several times during the presentation. The 3% tax is a base amount that counties can levy, while the additional 1% is authorized by the state legislature, and that's reauthorized every 2 years or so. And a number of localities do have that additional rate, which is regulated by the legislature. A little bit of a history on sales tax. Long history of sales tax in Onondaga County. In the packets that you have, there's a document titled Exhibit B, which has more detail on all of this, but the history of sales tax in this county dates back to 1967, the first sales tax agreement, which was 30 years ago. If you glance at the list, you'll see that there have been numerous revisions and arrangements of sales tax over that time, many of which were spurred by state action. The state tax code plays a pretty significant role on the decisions that we make about taxing here. And in 2004, Onondaga County obtained a special approval to exceed that 3% maximum rate, or maximum limit. And that was done specifically to ease the burden of financial burdens imposed by the state. I think it was specifically related to escalating costs of state-mandated Medicaid, which made that change. In 2004, the city and the county entered into agreement to address that additional 1%. So now we have this additional 1%. What are we going to do to divide that additional 1% or address the additional 1%? Prior to 2010, Onondaga County distributed the 3% tax rate as follows. The county received 38.23% of it. The city received 25.89% of it. Towns and villages received 28.92% of it, and the school district received 6.96% of it. Prior to 2010, the county distributed the 1% additional as follows. The county received 72% of that. The city received 11.35% of it. The towns and villages received 13% of it, and the school districts received 2.91% of it. The city, so that in that deal prior to 2010, the city received 22.25% plus $3 million per year, just solely for infrastructure improvement.
Can you just kind of point to what page you're on? This is something we have where the numbers are?
That's not included in your packet.
Okay, because it's kind of hard to hear all the numbers and appreciate, not hear because of the microphone, but to my opinion, to hear
digest.
the numbers. But,
and I can follow up with this so that you have it to look at.
Okay.
In the current agreement, during the 2010 negotiation process, it was agreed that the county would maintain that 3% base sales tax, while the city would receive an escalation in the share of the additional 1%. So that was the last agreement that we went into. The 10-year agreement had the same base rate, and then we would continue to see that increase over the 10-year period. In the first year, the city's share was 11.35%. In the second year, it jumped up to 92.8%, so a shift from 11 to 92, and then escalated from there, ultimately rising to 97.79% of that 1% in the last 5 years of the agreement. And then to reiterate, this agreement locks in that last 5-year rate, so it's significantly better than what was in the last agreement as a result of that. You do have a chart in your sales tax memo that you can reference here that gives a little bit of additional information on the specific revenues based on the 2010 agreement. And under the existing agreement, the burden is on the county to ensure that the 1% additional tax is extended to compensate the city out from the 3%. So essentially, they're responsible for making sure that that continues to happen and get approved on a every couple of year basis.
Can I ask you a quick question? When you say the school district, do you mean the city and the county school district, or are you talking just about the Syracuse City School District?
I believe it's across all.
Yes, that portion goes to all districts.
So when we escalated to 97% of that 1%, the school districts got a decrease in the tax share?
The 1% breakup was let me just
over time, over the life of the 2010 agreement. Yes.
Did that significantly impact the Syracuse City School District? I mean, should the city?
Well, I think.
I hope I'm not off topic. I'm just wondering if the city should consider that when we move forward in the budget.
Historically, the state legislature has made that up to the district in additional state aid on an annual basis. So
they base an increase on that, or they?
Well, they just.
I mean, I know we get increased aid every year.
Substantial increases in state aid, whereas the city AIM aid has been flat since 2010.
Right.
So I think the city's position has been, this is needed to benefit the city, and the school district is being made whole by the state.
On the issue of I understand that the fourth percentage point is additional and needs approval every 2 years. Is there any reason why we separate the 3 and the 1% instead of just talking about the whole of sales tax will be distributed this percent to the county, this percent to the schools, this percent to the city, especially when in this agreement it basically says that we will, if we ever lose or gain sales tax percentages, we'll make the distribution equal to this agreement, right?
Yes, I think the legal answer to that would be the enactment of the 3% and the 1% are separate legislative
So we always
actions,
have to refer to them as separate?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and another way to think about it is that there is frankly no guarantee that the 1% will be there for the entire 10-year
But
period.
still, why wouldn't we make it so the rate was exactly the same, since we're saying if it ever changes, if that 1% ever goes away, that we would distribute the 3% at the same fraction that we were distributing the 4%?
Well, at the time in 2010, the discussion centered around the fact that the rate could go away based on a variety of scenarios.
It's okay. It adds up the same anyways. Let's keep going.
Spelled out in the 2010 agreement. So depending on the scenario, the city could get up to 30% of the remaining or as low as 20%.
Okay.
But it's all kind of taken care of in terms of what possibly could transpire.
Okay.
Okay. So as we talk about the proposed agreement, took a lot of factors into consideration when entering into discussions about the proposed agreement, including but not limited to trends in sales tax, the potential for internet sales tax collections based off of the Supreme Court ruling last year, changing trends overall in retail spending, the macroeconomic outlook, and the state's push to institutionalize tourism dollars and spending there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of these. So in terms of sales tax trends overall sales tax trends are up. There is a great deal of uncertainty around future collections because of changing legal frameworks and broader social trends, so where people live, how they buy goods, things along those lines. But generally speaking, while tax revenues are volatile, these trends are headed in a good direction for us. Internet sales tax collection. So this past year, there was a Supreme Court decision, South Dakota versus Wayfair. So this happened in June 2018. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled in South Dakota versus Wayfair that states basically have to give sales tax, or companies have to give sales tax to states for goods that are being purchased online. So historically, you could potentially buy something off of, let's use Wayfair as obviously an example here. So maybe you buy a couch, you buy it from your couch that you're sitting on, that sales tax never materializes. As we move forward, that will change. Those sales tax revenues will materialize. And we are anticipating, I don't have a dollar figure, we are anticipating that will be a boon to the sales tax revenues that we collect annually moving forward.
I just have a question about that, and I don't know if you have the answer for me. Is the decision, because I know this has come up a couple times where, in the past, everyone's sort of concerned that more people shop on Amazon than they do at Wegmans because it's easier to just get things delivered to the door. Do we get it based on where it's purchased or where it's delivered? I mean, is that
The answer is
It would be where it's delivered.
okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I ask a question along those lines as well? It seems like those internet purchases are going to be state credited, state taxes, rather than county taxes. Would the state have to come up with,
The sales tax would be imposed as one unified sales tax
State
on the
sales tax.
transaction. So I'm not sure exactly the mechanics of the
Well,
internet
there's sales
collection,
tax
but-
here too, on the state sales tax, right? It's the additional 4 percentage points that we're not talking
Okay.
about.
Correct. yeah.
okay, right.
So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 is questions. Where are we? In
We're
your-
talking about the current agreement.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
I'm just making sure.
A little bit on the proposed agreement so that you guys, we're all on the same page. The proposed agreement extends the highest percentage of the 2010 agreement for 10 years until 2030. The proposed agreement provides the city with a sustainable source of revenue for the next decade. The strategy of entering into an agreement with the county allows the city to cast the widest net, ensuring that the city receives roughly a quarter of all sales tax revenues in Onondaga County. This agreement mitigates some economic risks by changing purchasing habits to online and guaranteeing the city's share of sales tax revenues generated by residents outside of city limits. And it mitigates the economic risk of businesses locating within the county because the city will receive its share of revenue regardless of location within Onondaga County. It's sustainable and a low-risk approach and provides us a foundation for our continued work to reduce costs and create new revenue streams in the city. A couple of things about the legal requirements, which I think you guys are aware of, but we need approval by both governing bodies. The county legislature already have passed, so it's on our plate here. Approval after that will come by an ordinance from the mayor, and then even after we go through that process, there is an additional approval that is required by the New York State Comptroller's Office, so there is an additional step once we get through this. Some other things to mention on that front. So I think obviously we take our financial duty to the taxpayers very seriously, so as a part of this process, we did think through some alternatives to the proposed agreement to ensure it was the best option, and again, I think we feel very strongly that it is after doing this due diligence. One option would be for the city to have protracted negotiations with the county on the share of sales tax. To be honest, I think we consider the overall value to the city and its citizens of the current deal and the proposed new deal, there were a lot of risks and trade-offs to making this decision, but ultimately the amount of money that we receive in this deal for the city, it's very fair. So going through the process of trying to renegotiate a deal that we feel is very fair for the citizens of Syracuse could be incredibly time-consuming and keep us from doing the other important things that we are trying to do. A second option would be for the city to preempt the county by charging its own sales tax. So when we looked into that option, sort of thought of it as our Brexit option, it would be putting the county and the city both into a pretty unknown situation. If the city were to preempt it, the city would then have to impose sales tax at half the rate of the county, so we'd be imposing a 1.5% sales tax, and the city would also have to create a new process for managing that sales tax collection and revenue, which is not something that we do presently. The question has been raised about how much the city would collect in sales tax if it were to preempt, so a couple of bullets on that. It's incredibly difficult and actually just not even feasible to provide a completely accurate sales tax data from the city versus the county at this point in time. The state of New York tracks sales tax data by taxing jurisdiction. So Onondaga County is the taxing jurisdiction here. So without a delineation between local municipalities and the taxing jurisdiction, it's impossible to say exactly what the difference would be. The state also does not
you can't know what happens under preemption until you preempt.
Correct.
Okay.
The state also does not track receipts based on the zip code where the taxes are collected. So that's one way that we tried to do this. We tried to say, okay, well, let's look at state records and then we can just break it up by zip code and associate that zip code with the local jurisdiction. The problem is that, you know, for example, a state salary tax or state sales report tax with the zip code for Walmart gives the zip code in Walmart's headquarters in Arkansas, not the zip code of the Walmart in Camillus or in wherever, you know, something was purchased.
On the what happens if we preempt, you said we only get 1.5%. We can only do half the rate of the county. Mm. So we're basically getting 1% of all the sales in Onondaga County right now. And you're saying we would only get 1.5% of only the transactions in the city of Syracuse?
Yes, that's correct.
Other factors impacting our ability to predict sales tax rates under the preemption are differences in collection. So for example, on a car, the sales tax is tied actually to where the car is garaged, not where the auto dealer is located. So if a dealership in Syracuse sells a car to a county resident, that sales tax ultimately would go to the county and not to the city. So there are a whole bunch of very tricky legal aspects to this that make it just not, and just logistical aspects that make it not
in the
feasible.
Interest of time, I think I'll say check. We understand that we can't know what we would get under preemption unless we preempt because the data is insufficient. So unless anybody else feels the need.
There. So one of my biggest concerns with this is that ultimately we don't know, right? Like what we would have gotten if we preempted, right? And I totally understand the difficulty of doing that, but looking forward for the next time this comes down the road and someone else is sitting here 10 years from now, you know, if we're trying to be a growing city and we're trying to grow our economy, we're trying to grow our population, it's very likely the next time this comes around that we will be in a better position to do that, right? I mean, we have 30% of the population, we're only getting 25% roughly. So it's a very reasonable thing 10 years from now that we can do it. And to me, when you're looking at something where it's an $86 million a year payout, and so you're looking at an $860 million basically income, it would be worth it if we had literally just one person, that's all they did for the city is track sales tax, go parcel by parcel at whatever salary you're going to pay them. If it makes an impact on what we can negotiate for 10 years from now, it would seem to be a wise investment. And I am, the fact that we don't have the ability to really know what that would be seems like something we should be looking at going forward is how do we track within our neighborhood business development or whatever, going by parcel, looking at, you know, okay, so there is a big box store that's not here. You know, we can spend some time doing research on what their average sales are and what those things are to be able to come up with at least a rough estimate so that way we're not flying blind 10 years from now to be able to do that. That's just my 2 cents on that. But
Sure. Thank you, Councilor. So I agree with you. I think in the time we have all spent together, I think you guys know that I truly believe in data-driven decision making, and it's very frustrating to me that we don't have.
The only thing I would say is I've never heard this 1.5% limit to the collection in the city sales tax before. If that's true, then the math becomes very hard, right? because then we would need 50% of the transactions to be happening in the city of Syracuse in order to, like, I don't know, I'm going to do the math wrong right now because I'm thinking too far ahead, but if you can't get the full 3% in the city, then it becomes very hard to get the money that we're getting now.
Yes, and if I could add to that, it's actually slightly more complicated because under the New York State statutes, there's not one definitive just distribution formula.
Yeah.
Section 1224 of the tax law provides two methods. One is apparently if the county elects to allocate the money between the county and the school districts countywide, then the city would only get 1%. It would be 1% to the county, 1% to the school districts, and 1% to the city, within the city. So instead of 1.5, we would only get 1%, if the county elected that option.
So instead of 1% in the county, we'd be getting 1% of the city.
Correct.
Which would be less, a lot less.
Correct.
Good. That's, yeah.
In
I was
follow-
gonna say, yeah, that's people I've talked to, that's the reason why we've never done that before is because it wouldn't add up properly. And this is a way that the city gets to be made whole by the county.
Yes, I mean, I think it's reflected in the history. So since the 1960s, there's been sales tax agreements, which the state, under another statute, 1262, provides that option where a city within a county can negotiate with the county and by agreement, subject to the approval of the state comptroller, they can distribute it under an agreed upon local methodology and, instead of defaulting to the statute. And the fact that the state and the city have done that for the last roughly 40 years, I think, proves the councilor's point that the alternative is very risky.
Yeah, and I will say, the administration has spent significant time trying to come up with better data. So, and at an administration's past, I mean, I think in the research that we have done, there are articles dating back, decades that show completely widespread community interest, an enormous amount of time, energy, and resources, and still no credible estimates of what sales tax collections would look like if it were just a city. So it's hard. But to your point, Councillor, yes, there are things that we could do. We could hire an outside firm to come in and try to give us some estimations. We could require that businesses in the city report that information to us, and that's a conversation that certainly we are willing to have and discuss as we think about preparing for this in the future. I do think, though, given what we know from a statute perspective, that even without data, it's hard to see a situation in which we would be in a better place preempting.
But sorry.
Go ahead.
Just the other thing to that point, I would say, I mean, one of the things that, we've certainly all had discussions on is, how tenuous sometimes this can be politically with the county legislature. Which to me is another reason why the city should be able to understand what it would look like if we needed to be self-sustaining, right? If who knows what the county exec's going to be in 10 years, and if there were to be some people that weren't interested in helping the city, we got to be prepared for that outcome. So.
Yep, I completely agree, and I think it makes sense for us all to do what's in our power to try to get better data and information on this.
So as Chad, just like there were a group of questions that were shared ahead of time with everybody, so I kind of want to, there's three clusters of questions. Yes.
Along I only wanted to ask because it's along the same line. So as a devil's advocate, one might ask if that's the case, I understand the political arena now and that they're ready to go and it looks fine and everything, but one might ask as a follow-up to Councillor Green's question is, so why don't we hire somebody to come in and do an analysis during this year and then negotiate at the end of the year?
My response to that would be, I think we have, based on what we know about the law and what we know about the numbers, I think we have enough information to say that this is the best deal that we will get, and that I don't want to say wasting time. Certainly there's value to doing that. I don't think it's going to give us a different outcome, and we have a window here to lock in, going back to achieving fiscal sustainability, we have a window here to lock in a really good deal for the city of Syracuse and for our citizens for the next decade, and I would like to see us move that forward.
Okay.
So the three groups of questions that were shared ahead of time, there were understanding local sales tax and what happens without this agreement, which I think you've done a good job of shedding light on, and I feel there's some new information, and like the 1.5, the half the amount the county get math is pretty overwhelming, and I think that probably is the thing that makes it hard to do. So moving on from that, and then I think it becomes, we're talking about probably $4 billion of local government money. Like, this is one of the primary ways that local government gets its money. And we do have, so there's the is it fair within the sales tax world, and then is the distribution fair of sales tax, and then is the distribution fair of the other ways that government gets money. Because if you have fair here and not fair here, I think that can be a question of fair here might not be fair if it's not fair in the other places where local government gets its money. So the other questions, there's a couple on funding, so like roads. So on page 4 of the agreement, it's item 7, there's this line that kind of references how in 2011 the county will no longer give money for roads, basically. Infrastructure payments. Like, the towns still get infrastructure payments. They're getting larger infrastructure payments than the previous agreement, I think, in this agreement, as the kind of carrot to get them on board. But we don't get that anymore. So, like, the county's not paying for roads in the city, as I understand it, whereas before this agreement they did. But we're still the seat of the county. So anyways, of the questions that have to do with the roads, like, does the county pave roads in Syracuse? We're part of the county.
Mary, I don't know if from a budgetary standpoint, if you have a sense of how much funding we get from, but to some, yes, I mean, it does happen. I don't know the exact number of roads that they pave or help us pave, but those are ongoing conversations. We look for areas where there's, where it makes sense for us to collaborate, and we do those things, but I don't know the exact dollar figure or number.
As I understand it, we don't get money from the county right now to pave roads in the city.
Yeah.
We've seen more city roads paved through the Save the Lane program, so more than any other avenue, I think.
Also, South Avenue was another major development that happened a few years ago, because they had to do with the sewer upgrades that they were making, so they came through.
So if there's a way to give us any kind of number for what they do pave in the city, or give us recently under, because it does seem like part of the trade-off in getting a higher percentage is that we're no longer going to take the infrastructure money, which is just to know the amounts, right?
But that's been since 2011, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
the money
so-
went away in 2011 with the
10 years
larger-
ago.
These are 10-year agreements,
Yes, I understand that.
so
Yeah.
it went away in the last agreement.
And we can follow up with DPW and engineering to try to get you a more concrete estimate.
And then from there, so like within the sales tax agreement, it seems pretty fair. There's a lot of arguments you can make, like the quarter of the population, or the third of the population versus a quarter of, it's not exact, but it's not horribly off on the amount of sales tax. But then when I look at, for instance, property tax, which is another way that local government gets money, I just did a look at kind of the exemptions when you look at the county and the city, and basically 43% of the land of the assessed value in Syracuse is paying taxes, and the other share is exempt. In the county, like if you take the county minus the city, so just the suburbs, 85, almost 86% of the assessed value is paying property taxes. So of the whole county, 26% is not paying property taxes. What does this mean? This means that in order to collect taxes in the city, we need to have twice the rate of what they need to collect $1 in the county. So in order, our rate has to be twice as high on our assessed value to get the same dollar as it has to be in the suburbs. So like within that context, this other stream seems kind of unfair. But I don't know if there's not like a way to put an equalization in here, but I'm just saying that it's hard to, while the sales tax alone, there's this argument that it feels fair, and I see it, absolutely. When you isolate it to sales tax, it almost seems overwhelmingly fair the way you're describing it. But at the same time, there are these other sources where the city really carries a burden and is carrying, and they're regional assets. So most of the exemptions, there's nobody, I think, in the room who would say that the hospitals aren't regional for the whole county and produce value, and that the universities aren't regional and produce value for the whole county. So I do think that those other contextual pieces matter as the city and county work together. I guess I kind of answered the questions to make the point, but
Yeah. I mean, to be frank, I think that's probably why you get county legislators that may not represent any portion of the city on board with agreements like this, because they understand the value that the city brings, and that's, again, like I mentioned before, it's the way that the city gets made whole. You know, you're absolutely right in the fact that more properties or a higher percentage don't pay taxes.
Right.
You know, the percentage-wise, you'd have to actually double it, but you know, it's something that's of value to everyone. You know,
I guess
suburbs can't exist without the city.
Absolutely, and I guess this is where we need partnership with the county. The county needs partnership with the city, but at the same time, this isn't like a gift from county government to save the city. It's not just pure benevolence. Like, there are spaces where we carry the load, and there are spaces where it gets maybe offset based on what you're saying. So I just think the context, this is not in any way a gift of benevolence purely to the city. There's other spots where the city more than carries its fair share.
I mean, I agree. I think this is a fair agreement for us. I wouldn't say that this is a gift agreement. I'd say that this is a very fair agreement for us for the types of reasons that you're laying out. And it's a good agreement for us.
Totally other questions.
Well, a bit off the topic here, but along the same lines, the comptroller just came out recently on the new cap, and how is that going to affect us this year? Are we going to be, you know, where are we looking at that? If one were looking for other revenue streams. Yes, yes.
Can you come up for this one? Because you're less excited for this one, so you're quieter.
Well, it's going to be the same positions we've been in every single year, trying to stay under the tax cap. So,
which still allows us no room at all to increase tax.
Well, a $35 million tax levy, 2% is, you know, $700,000.
Right,
it's
nothing.
Not a lot of money.
Not a lot, except for the last 8 years that we didn't do it. Then we'd be at 5 point something million.
In the last number of years, we had assessed valuations that went higher, so our tax levy went higher with those assessed valuations. So, to get, you know, you want growth in your city in those valuations, and if you know you can't have that additional 2% on top of that. So it can be a little bit more.
We got a lot of people building in the city now, so that's why I'm thinking that will accumulate over time. That won't accumulate today, but some of these pilots, when that pops, that'll be, you know,
at the end of the
sizable.
pilot, right?
Yeah.
Yep, and I appreciate the point, Councilor. We are, you know, Mary's starting to get deep into budget season. We're starting to really dig in and think about what we need to do this year from a budget standpoint. So happy to keep in touch with you as we're working through that as well.
Are there any questions or comments from the group that is here in the audience? City Auditor Master Poll.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilors, excuse me. Just for the record, I served on the county legislature 10 years ago. I also served on a reapportionment committee that was put together, I'll say fairly quickly, from the time the legislature authorized the reapportionment committee, which I believe was 5 or 6 of us. I know specifically I was on it as a legislator, and Ken McCrisky was from the city's representative. And from that time, that was in February, I believe, and it was voted on, and I want to say in May or June is when the 10-year agreement was passed unanimously, ironically, at the time. My concern, and I was quoted in the paper saying it, and I don't pull this back at all, is I think we're rushing to judgment with this. We had a 4-month committee. It's not a 4-year committee. It's not anything insane. We may have the best deal. I love that it's believed to be a fair deal, and I was proud of it, as a city representative 10 years ago. But I'm not sure we have the knowledge to know that it's a fair deal. We do need more. We do need the data. We do need to discuss. I believe, for the along the same lines comparison, we have a census every 10 years. It redraws congressional lines, how many representatives you have, et cetera. This is a 10-year agreement, as you referenced. It's between probably $3.5 billion and $4 billion spending proposal that has been a handshake agreement. And I don't mean to say that poorly. I highly respect the mayor and the county executive addressing it now, because being out in front of this is very important on funding that's that great. But why the rush to judgment? We don't know where 81 is going. Will that help or hurt sales tax in Onondaga County? Do we deserve more as a city? Is it fair? Do we deserve less? I'd hate to say that. I believe the 10-year agreement that in place was fair based upon the data that we had at that time. It has changed. I mean, the aggressive plan that was announced yesterday, Syracuse Surge with the governor and the mayor's cooperation, outstanding. That could lead to a lot more development, and maybe the city deserves more. So we have 2 years left on an agreement that is fair, and to delay or discuss, and I don't want to make it sound like it's got to be this big delay, to discuss this for what we did a 4-month, maybe a 6-month, to say what's happening with 81, where are we, what will that lead to, pros and cons. The other thing too, as you mentioned, Councilor, with the tax cap and some of the things that are popping, a lot of those pilot agreements through agreements with the IDA had sales tax exemptions on them. Where do those stand going forward? Are we going to continue those sales tax exemptions based on what the IDAs do moving forward? I think there's a lot of unanswered questions that it is, as was mentioned, it's definitely the best years of the pilot, of the agreement. I believe it ramped up years 7 through 10. But guess who it's not best for? The school districts were zeroed out, unless something changed that I'm not aware of. Early on in the plan, in the 10 years, the school district received some funds that went to the city school district that went to zero. So the last years of this agreement are the most painful. I mean, they can budget it very easily. You're getting zero out of sales tax. So, should that be renegotiated? I think so. At least, even if you come to the decision that what we have is the most fair and the best for the city, boy, I'd like to have data, current data, that proves that. And I don't think we have that. We had no discussion in public with the towns and villages, with the school districts, with our school board, with businesses. I mean, 10 years ago, the Hotel Syracuse was shuttered. We had lots of downtown residential things popping up, development. I think there's a lot more to discuss than auto dealers in and out of West Genesee Street, one of the largest, sales tax generators. I would be willing to say, without any data, I apologize, but I'd be willing to say we're selling more cars in Syracuse right now than we were 10 years ago. Because I believe we have more dealerships right now that have reopened along Auto Row Strip. It's just things that, if it's passed, it's probably a very fair deal, but we just don't know that for sure. Could we get more? And I don't know if you have any other questions of the specifics in Councilor Driscoll, I believe, or no, Councilor Rudd brought up the additional 1%. That was the political will of the county legislature at that time, as, okay, we've agreed to a dollar figure, but we're going to make you take it out of that additional 1% because of the uncertainty of those agreements. At the time, and I hope it remains the same, I know it remains the same because essentially what I'm reading is that we've only changed the dates. There was a provision in the first sales tax agreement to address exactly that. What if this goes away? What happens on the backside? And that was addressed, and I'm assuming that is which is fair.
And not get into the precise values. The way I understand it, the city's roughly getting 25% of total local sales tax, and if the 4% becomes 3%, instead of getting 25% of 4%, we'll get 25% of 3%. Is that roundly correct?
if it's the fault of the county, if the county legislature fails to do a home rule message, the city would get 30%.
All right.
If it's the fault of the state, we would get 25%. Then under another scenario, we would get.
What's the other scenario? Who goes to fail?
If it's the fault of the state, we get 20%. Under another scenario, we would get 25%. There's about 6 different scenarios in the agreement, depending on who acts or who fails to act. So basically, it ranges from 20 to 30%.
Okay, so it never goes below 20, never goes above 30.
Correct.
Okay, fair enough.
I have a question for you, Marty.
Sure.
Well, I appreciate your historical knowledge on this, and especially what you're talking about with the school district, because I do feel, and I'll leave this with my counselors here, that, you know, if we are zeroing out the school district like that, the city's going to have to.
Actually, it's 0.63%.
It isn't zeroed out.
Okay.
Remain for the next 10 years.
But if you're taking
That's year 10 of the cities.
Correct.
But I
Thank
was
you for the
wondering-
correction. I did not remember that.
I was
Were the other
wondering-
districts? I hate to. Were the suburban districts zeroed
That's
out?
for the schools in general, so the county.
across the board.
But across the board.
Across the board.
What
I
does
think
the
it's
city of
apportioned by
Syracuse school
enrollment.
district, I believe, was zeroed
It's
out?
apportioned by enrollment. I believe that 0.67% of the whole is then
Yeah, it should be
apportioned to
apportioned.
all the schools in the county by enrollment.
Okay, I did not. I don't recall that, but I believe you, Joe. Thank you.
Well, I don't know what kind of dollar figures we're talking about, but I would think that the city, in our budgeting, should take that into consideration when we go there. But my question is more about the historical decision-making and coming to this tax agreement 10 years ago. You say that it's your recommendation that we pull this apart, look into it again, get better data. And I'm wondering, when you made this agreement 10 years ago, and you are convinced, and I think everyone agrees with you, that it was a good deal 10 years ago, and you did a good job on that. But I'm wondering, what data did you have 10 years ago that you were able to research and come up with a solid sort of conviction about your decision that we don't have?
I'd almost say simple data that, once again, this didn't take 2 years, or it wasn't. I want to be very clear. If you pass this Monday or whatever, you're never going to hear a criticism out of me saying the city council did a bad job by the city of Syracuse. I will not. I believe that the deal for the 10 years was as fair based on knowledge, or based on what we had. I mean, what do we have from the county comptroller's office, from the state comptroller's office? We had Destiny reports their sales. The New York State DMV reports auto sales in Onondaga County. Is it broken down 2 cities? But you don't have to. I'm drawing a blank on the woman's name from the Auto Dealers Association, but I'm pretty sure she's still in place over there. She knows dealership by dealership how many vehicles are sold in the city of Syracuse. We had the school. Larry Cummings was the head of the school board association at the time. He was in every meeting, and the reason why I'm thinking it was as tragic as it was for the school district is he was probably the most upset at the end of the day by what happened to the school districts in this first sales tax agreement. Towns and villages talked about whether, I know that the city isn't necessarily concerned about what the towns and villages think, but it's important to know what it's going to do to them in those districts for the community as a whole. So we had, it's not important for the sake of the city finances. I wholeheartely agree with that. But should we be talking about, new development and what's happening with 81? Like I said, we were talking about on-center hotel. Remember, we were all talking about an on-center hotel 10 years ago, and what would or wouldn't happen with sales tax projections that could be in downtown. The hospitals, we've had growth at the hospitals, including the cancer center, all of those things. We looked at the 10 years worth of data that we knew, 10 years of what projections would be, and made as good of an educated decision as we could going forward. All of those things I don't think have remained the same. I believe that's, once again, I hate to compare it back to something so simple, but why do we do a census every 10 years? Why don't we just say, geez, it seems like a pretty good deal that we have this amount of Congress people, let's just stick with it.
But don't you think we'd have to see a really extreme increase in order to,
I mean, and while if you feel that the financials, of the city of Syracuse are that strong, maybe not. I just think we've been running a structural deficit for many years, and if we did 0.5% of a sales tax increase 8 years ago, and I don't want to be Monday morning quarterback, I'm not trying to say that. It's just every little bit, if we take care of the pennies, the dollars will take care of themselves.
I do want to respond from the administration, if you
Sure.
don't mind. There are a couple of things just factually I want to make sure we're all clear on. When a car is purchased in the city does not receive the sales tax necessarily. It is based on where the car is garaged. So a change in the number of cars bought in the city is not necessarily indicative of any change in the sales tax that we're receiving as the city. I do, with respect, I want to be clear that we do care about the towns and villages. I don't want to make it sound like we don't. They're represented by the legislator who approved this.
Sure.
So I want to be clear about that. Yeah. Our goal as administration is to achieve fiscal sustainability. We're taking many measures to make sure that we're keeping track of the dollars and the cents. This agreement is thoughtful of looking back at historical data and looking at future trends and where we assume that they will go based on things like retail sales and changes along those lines. It's a good and it's a fair agreement, and it's the best for the city and the citizens. We have a window of time to do it now. It would be inaccurate to say that we haven't looked at data that's available. We have looked at the data that's available. There is just difficulty in getting additional data, and I don't think that we change that in the amount of time that we have between now and when the term the agreed term.
With all due respect, and I don't want to get into, we had 10 years ago, we had very open public discussions on data, trends, etc., and that did not take place this year. I did not see a public meeting once. This actually is the first public meeting I've seen. There was public comment during the county legislature when they voted. I apologize. That's, I am shocked to hear, I shouldn't say shocked, I'm surprised. My understanding 10 years ago, maybe we were wrong. Maybe we had bad information 10 years ago. Is I agree with you that my understanding of when, where sales tax would be credited during auto sales was where it was registered. When the vehicle was registered is where. So if I buy a vehicle and register it at my house, or if it's registered at a dealership in the city of Syracuse, where the sales tax is collected because where the data is gathered is where it is credited for. If I buy my understanding is
Marty, you might have been correct with that, and remember the DMV used to be on Erie Boulevard at that time.
Well, it's still in the maybe it's in town of Geddes now.
I think it's
that's
just
true.
over the line,
But once again, if I buy a vehicle at a dealership in Oneida and it is delivered to my house or registered in the city of Syracuse, I don't think I pay Oneida. You don't pay less sales tax because they're at 7%. You pay the sales tax for where your taxing jurisdiction is. I think, unless that has changed, that's I would be. I'm going to buy all my cars for 1% less in a different county if that's the case, because it's a significant amount of dollars. But I don't think that's accurate.
Well, it sounds like you don't even need to purchase it outside the county. They can just garage it at a different county the way they just explained it. But I don't know. I agree there's some uncertainty there. But
interesting. Yeah, I get it. I support the current plan as it is. I just think that, could there be more out there? Sure, there always could be more. Is it something we should take a look at? Maybe.
And are there other
I think that just my 2 cents, I think that the city's growing, and I think in 10 years that we maybe should be considering, moving on our own. But for now, when I just take the Bosch and Loam of it and just have a look of what I see when I go out. I've seen Township 5 develop. I've seen Fayetteville Town Center develop. There have been huge developments all over the county at equal a pace as the development that's been happening downtown, maybe even larger than what's been happening downtown. And I don't know if, I hope, when you take a look at your position on whether we should re-examine that, that you're sort of thinking about the development that's happening outside of the city as well.
Oh, I wholeheartedly agree. No, I
want to be ahead of that in 10 years, and I hope that we can move towards being there in 10 years. But as the city is growing, and super proud of what's happening in the city, and
And as am I, and the cooperation is vital and refreshing. It's
we have 5 that grow up out of nowhere, and have tremendous retail.
Yeah.
Tremendous retail in Cicero, tremendous retail in Fayetteville.
But, Salina Street is a little more active than it used to be. Warren Street's a little more active than it used to be 10 years ago.
A little bit. We're getting there. In 10 years from now, we'll
true,
be there.
very true. And we always did the preemption option was called the nuclear option at the county legislature 10 years ago. This was the nuclear option. It was not good for anybody.
I know property tax and sales tax are different, but part of the reason why there can be all of this private activity in the towns and villages is because we carry the burden of the nonprofit organizations. So the property taxes and the sales, there's probably some correlation there. So in terms of equity, I think all of that plays into the discussion. I mean, we carry the burden on the property tax exemptions.
I love the nonprofits. I hate to refer to them as a burden, but I think the bigger burden we carry.
Assets, but they do limit our ability to collect property taxes.
Of course, but the bigger burden I believe that we carry is the county makes those, and this was in discussion 10 years ago too. The county makes the towns and villages whole for sales tax, for property taxes. If you don't pay your property taxes out in Camillus, the town of Camillus gets your property tax money from the county and it becomes on their end. In our situation, if you don't pay it on Glenwood Ave, the city has to collect from you. So being made whole for uncollected property taxes is a big deal. And thus was the discussions of why should we give the city more money? Well, they did want a strong city center and believe that we're the heart of the county and all those nice things that we say are true. Part of the reality is they're getting their property tax money when people don't pay. We are not when people don't pay.
So my last question would be to legal, and I sent this to you yesterday, and it's just, I've read it, but I'd like to hear from you. There's no changes in here. The thing that we're looking at to sign and agree to, nobody changed a comma or added a sentence in there or something that.
No, that is a correct statement. I have reviewed the proposed amendment. It is basically an extension of the current 2010 agreement for another 10 years. It changes the dates to make that happen, and that's what it does. It carries it forward.
And that's the basic part? I mean, otherwise it's the same?
Correct.
Okay.
Joe, I have a legal question for you then too, because that gives me some concern. I was told or understood that we were extending year 10. We're extending a 10-year agreement of year 10. If we're changing the dates, we're starting over at year 1, aren't we?
No, the way the amendment works is the current agreement is in force until December 31st of 2020. The amendment will then kick in and add the other next 10 years to December 31st of 2030.
So it's different in the sense that the first 5 years, the amount just becomes the 10th year, and the language would be consistent across all 10 years, I would assume.
Yes, the amendment is specifically identifying that last bracket of distribution, freezing it for the next 10 years and carrying it forward for 10 years.
Right.
So,
because, I mean, Joe, you remember, we took and that was part of the negotiation too, the city took a pretty good hit in year one and 2 of the initial. So if we can't afford year 1 and 2 hit, really. So if you're comfortable with that, I'm comfortable with that. I mean, that's.
I can guarantee 100% the legal language extends it from where we are now, which is the final distribution based on the transition from 2010.
Excellent.
It takes that.
That's important. That's very important.
10 years, which makes it very attractive to the city, in my opinion.
Good.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you, and you know where to find me by phone or text or email if you need have any questions. But thank you.
I have 2 more lighthearted things. One, are you related to Rob Simpson? Because you look so much like Rob Simpson from sitting here. You're a little shorter, but you are.
I'm not related to Rob Simpson. That I know
Wow.
of.
Wow, we're going to do a little thing with that. We got to figure that out. You got to play it up. And otherwise, while we're talking about revenue for local government and sales tax and property tax, Councilor Boyle, as she's getting ready to leave, she's proposed a brilliant idea of a Rudd swear jar. And it's either going to make me swear less, or it might just like fix the
Heather, do you
financial
wanna
situation
plug
for the
something,
city.
Tim? Yeah.
It's gonna be a swear jar in the council office.
So the many new ideas.
Just for Tim,
revenue.
though. Just for Tim. Yeah. Everybody else is allowed to swear appropriately, just not
Appropriately,
you.
it's over. Fixing the financial situation one word at a time.
Perfect.
Yes.
If you want to go back quickly to infrastructure, the discussion did jog my memory.
Yes.
So if you look at paragraph 7 in the current agreement,
On page 4.
correct.
Yeah.
So the infrastructure agreement that they discussed that was created in 2004, my recollection is that was based upon the carousel expansion. So the city and the county, Driscoll administration at the time, were trying to find a way to compensate the city because of the the property tax exemption that was going to be given to the carousel expansion, and the county agreed to, out of the revenue that would presumably flow from the expansion, to provide these extra infrastructure payments. And
But then they were phased out in 2011
it was part of the negotiations because,
because the mall is now paying taxes.
well, it's not.
Oh,
No.
I know, and it was not a serious. It was a
It-
facetious
The
comment.
change in the 2010 agreement, I think the theory was the city was being compensated in other ways.
Okay.
But it did, so to get back to the initial question, road work in the city by the county has taken place, as Mary Vossler referenced, on Adams Street, and we do that by additional intermunicipal agreements separate and apart from the sales tax agreement.
To the extent you're able to share the answers you didn't have in the packet that you thought were in the packet, I'd appreciate that. To the extent you have answers on the road information, I would appreciate that too in writing. Otherwise, I'll wrap it up so that we're done within the hour time and don't,
Is there anybody else who
over.
wants to speak?
Is there anybody else? I think we're not a lot of interest. So with that, do I need to make a motion to do it? I can just close the meeting. We're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.